pain in front of the shoulder doing this? Let's reconsider the term shoulder impingement and dive into exercises that can actually help you with your pain. Prehab, welcome back to the channel. I'm Dr. Dorian St. Danik, physical therapist. You may have been diagnosed with shoulder impingement, but what exactly is it? Shoulder impingement is characterized by non-traumatic, usually unilateral single-sided pain in the front of the shoulder. Pain is worsened during or after lifting the arm. To note, the term shoulder impingement is becoming outdated. The theory that inflammation and damage occur to impingement or compression has not held up over the years when evaluated with X-ray, MRI, biomechanical movement studies, and even surgery. A newer term known as subacromial pain syndrome refers to the irritation of one or multiple structures, including the subacromial bursa. So if we take a look at our model here, we have the scapula, we have the clavicle, we have the humerus bone. Underneath where the clavicle and the spine of the scapula meet, this is our acromion. Underneath, or the subacromial area, we're gonna have a fluid-filled sac, that is the bursa. The bursa is here to help us maintain a little bit of space and cushion any sort of contact between the supraspinatus tendon as well as the bone underneath where the acromion meets. So that takes us to our second structure that might be irritated, the supraspinatus tendon. That's gonna be on the top of the scapula, and that's gonna run underneath that subacromial space and attach to the outside upper part of our humerus bone. That might be another structure that's irritated. And then finally, we have our long head biceps tendon. So that's gonna come up and through and actually attach deep to the inside top side of your glenoid fossa, which is basically the socket of the ball and socket joint. So between those three structures, the bursa, the supraspinatus tendon, which comes off to the side of our upper arm bone, the humerus, and then finally the long head of the biceps tendon, which comes to the fossa or the socket portion. We think one or all or a combination of the two or the three is irritated in subacromial pain syndrome. For our purposes, we will cover exercises that have been proven to help with pain and function for any of the conditions and structures mentioned so far. If you're wanting to see if you may have subacromial pain syndrome, try these three special tests. The Hawkins-Kennedy test, number 1. For this test, you're gonna wanna take your arm right in front of your body, 90 degrees. You can kind of support it with your opposite arm, and then go ahead and let your forearm rotate internally. If you don't feel anything yet, you can even add in a little bit of overpressure into that motion. That may create some pain on the front side of your shoulder. When we're thinking about the mechanics here, this is really a rotator cuff supraspinatus load, and then it's challenging our internal rotation mobility. So remember that for our exercise selection later. Number 2, the painful arc test. So for this one, we're gonna take both of our arms out to the side, palms facing forward, and we are going to reach up overhead, slowly on the way up, slowly on the way down. Now, you may feel that pain on the front side, top side of the shoulder again. If we think biomechanics, we see that we're getting a lift away from the body. That supraspinatus tendon is working, but we're also now in relative external rotation as we come up into our top position. So now we're looking at not internal rotation mobility, but external rotation mobility as we reach up overhead. The third and final test is the supraspinatus strength test. There's a couple different ways to do these. We're gonna take our arm in front of our body at a slight angle, about a 45 away from the torso, and we're gonna induce some force to try to push the arm down to the ground. So I'm using my left arm to push down, I'm using my right arm to fight that, and I'm seeing as I start to produce more and more force through the supraspinatus, do I get that front side pain? An alternative test to this is also with the thumb down. Now we have internal rotation at the shoulder. We're gonna create that resistance and we're gonna see, do we have any of that front side pain? Biomechanics again, this is inducing high levels of muscular demand at the supraspinatus tendon. Remember that for later. If you are positive for these tests, you may have a diagnosis of subacromial pain syndrome. As you work through these exercise progressions, You can come back to these tests and see if your pain, your mobility, and your strength improve. All right, our first round of exercise is gonna be for activation of the rotator cuff musculature, as well as controlling the external and internal rotation mobility. We've got a band attached at about hip height. We're gonna walk out with that band with our forearm in a neutral position. And once that band starts pulling me that way, I'm gonna start feeling my rotator cuff on the back side, on the outside of the upper arm. It's gonna start engaging. And if we think about what this position is trying to do, it's trying to pull us into internal rotation. We're resisting that with an isometric or a static hold for external rotation. We're gonna go ahead and hold this position for 30 to 45 seconds, 3 rounds. You can even do this 1 to 2 times a day. Again, this is gonna help you activate the right muscles you need to get that subacromial pain feeling better, but also it's gonna help you with your load tolerance, or just like your ability to put some force and stress through that shoulder. Once you've got pretty comfortable with this setup, we're gonna elevate the arm to 90 degrees, right? So that's shoulder height. I'm using a supported structure here, and that's gonna really help me, again, target this rotational mobility without having to exhaust my arm by holding it up for so long. Same parameters, 30, 45 seconds, 3 rounds. And if you remember that Hawkins-Kennedy test that we did earlier, where we kind of internally rotated the shoulder, you're actually putting yourself in a pretty similar position, but then loading up supraspinatus, infraspinatus, these muscles that rotate the shoulder outward, and you're starting to, again, build some tolerance to this position. So you might even go and retest that movement, and it might even feel better. We're gonna graduate to our last exercise. This one's the hardest. I've now gone into shoulder flexion and abduction, so I'm kind of closing down my shoulder joint a little bit. I'm facing my anchor this time, pulling that band back into external rotation. Same hold parameters here, same area that you're feeling working. This is just kind of the highest level of activation that we're gonna go for. All right, so for the second round of exercises, we're gonna be working on motor control or movement control of our overhead reaching. For this exercise, we're gonna need a foam roller and a band. And just like we were using pretty light resistance for our isometric holds, make sure that your band is light enough that you can actually create external rotation, wrist outside of elbow position, and hold that position as you get into your overhead reach. So we're gonna set up in a split stance at a wall. Foam roller is about eye level, wrist crease right in the center of that foam roller. I'm creating some push towards the wall into the foam roller with my elbows in and my wrists out. That's now tension on that resistance band. From here, I'm holding that tension. I'm beginning to slide that foam roller up, pretty slow and controlled, and then I'm leaning forward to get a little bit extra on that overhead position, come off of the wall, and then come down with the arm. So one more time, push into the foam, band resisting out at the wrist, elbows in, reaching up, leaning forward, lean back, and then back down. We are still feeling that rotator cuff pathway. Couple compensations to look out for here. As you're reaching overhead, try not to shrug, right? We're not gonna get the neck involved with this by taking our shoulder blades up. Keep the shoulder blades relaxed. Think about the shoulder blade moving in a more upward but more outward position, okay? And just not letting that neck kind of kick in. Second compensation to look out for, since we're going overhead, there's a little bit more demand on our core. So as we're reaching up, let's be sure not to flare the low back, flare the ribs, keep the ribs down. Think about doing like a little bit of a crunch maneuver as you get into those overhead positions. Repetition wise, explore 15 to 25 repetitions for a couple rounds. This is something you can do 5 to 7 days a week. All right, so for progression from the wall slide, we can take a look at the band assisted overhead press, going from a W up to a Y position. So again, I've got my bands attached at about hip height. They are behind me. I'm gonna step forward once again in my split stance position. Taking elbows forward, I'm now in that 90-degree position out to the side, as well as shoulder height. So I've drawn a right angle, both at my torso and my elbow. From here, keeping the elbows forward, elbows inward, we're gonna start to reach up, draw the letter Y, and then slowly lower back down. We're feeling pretty good work on that back side of the shoulder, that's rotator cuff, and some of that muscle burn might even come into the upper outer arm. Couple compensations as we do this. Let's try not to flare the elbows back, or rather keep them forward so you can keep loading your rotator cuff. Let's try not to flare the ribs, so perform that crunch maneuver to keep the low back from getting compressed. And then finally, try not to shrug this again, right? Keep the tops of the shoulders relaxed. We're not using our neck. We're trying to target the scapula and the rotator cuff. I'm using about 10 pounds here. Anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 pounds on this assistance is gonna be an appropriate resistance to try. And again, 15, 25 reps, couple rounds. You can do this 5-7 days a week. And if you guys remember that painful arc test, right? Taking our arms up and out to the side, there's a good chance these last two exercises are gonna help that motion feel better, look better, feel stronger as well. With these last two, the wall slide and the assisted overhead, you're getting really good motor control training of this kind of overhead reach motion. So retest. All right, third round of exercises. We're gonna go after functional strength. This is the strength of our overhead reach. This is gonna directly target building out muscle, building out force production in the supraspinatus, rotator cuff muscle. First one we're diving into is gonna be a side plank with an overhead reach. We're gonna start this, well, we're gonna need a band. Maybe this band is just a little bit stronger than the one we were using on that wall slide. We're gonna get into our side plank position. That's elbow under the shoulder, not above, under the shoulder. Stack the knees, prop yourself up. So I'm on a side plank on my knees. I'm gonna get that external rotation at the top. We're referencing the top arm here. External rotation on that top arm. I'm pulling my wrist towards the ceiling, fist towards the ceiling. I'm gonna begin to reach up and forward with my left arm while kicking my left leg back behind me. So this can be performed at kind of like a 4 to 5 second tempo, keeping good tension on that rotator cuff musculature. And we are challenging our spine stability, core stability here, making sure we're not flaring the low back. And you only want to do maybe about 8 to 12 reps of these since the force demands are a bit higher. And we do want to feel, once again, our pathway of that rotator cuff is going to be the backside, outside of the arm. Try 2 to 3 sets. This is something you're only doing 2 to 3 days a week. All right, this one's a non-traditional rotator cuff strength exercise. Half kneeling, single arm overhead press. We're in a half kneeling position. I've got cushion under my knee here. I'm grabbing a dumbbell and I'm gonna set up in this position. Remember Hawkins-Kennedy? We're kind of right here at the start of the Hawkins-Kennedy position. I'm gonna go ahead and punch this weight up, trying to keep my wrist out, my elbow in, and I'm gonna add in a little bit of a turn as I get into my overhead press. Slowly controlling back down, belly button points forward again. Press up, rotate towards that front leg, and then slowly start to lower down. So we can load this one heavy. We can get that 8 to 12 rep range. We're gonna feel that rotator cuff as we're resisting falling inward. That's wrist out, elbow in. We're gonna feel the front of the shoulder as well. Really good supraspinatus work here on this overhead press motion. 8 to 12 reps, 2 to 3 sets, 2 to 3 days a week. When you begin to retest that supraspinatus strength test here and here, after you've gone through these last two progressions, you might start to see some improved strength and definitely improved tolerance and less pain with those couple positions there. If you want to see these exercises and more, their regressions, progressions, and modifications, kind of get a detailed program over the course of 8 to 12 weeks, go ahead and check out our rotator cuff rehab and prehab programs in the app. All right, so let's summarize. Shoulder impingement is characterized by pain in front of the shoulder with overhead reaching or pressing tasks. The subacromial bursa, the biceps tendon, and the supraspinatus tendon can all be implicated and be a potential pain generator. We're going to start with supported isometrics to help improve the tolerance of loading these areas. Number 2, we're going to be progressing to wall slides and band-assisted overhead press to improve the control of our overhead tasks and activities. And finally, side plank with overhead reaches and half kneeling overhead presses are a great way to build out long-term strength of the biceps and the rotator cuff for prehab against future injury.